In the first 3 sermons in my Creationism series, I explained what the word evolution really means and how all the supposed evidence that animals evolved into other animals is either misinterpreted data at best or outright fraudulent at worst. I've shown that the concept of everything, starting from all the elements themselves to all the stars and planets and moons, then to all the plant life, and then to all the animal life, the concept that they all evolved from each other is really ridiculously absurd. The mathematical statistics behind their theory are truly impossible. There's no way that a big bang of hydrogen and helium just magically turned into all the other elements. There's no way that a first star could ever pull itself together. And there's no way life could just naturally begin on its own from non-living elements. Beyond that, there's no way that the supposed first living cell was already programmed with functional DNA or even RNA to already know how to eat and replicate. And there's no empirical evidence that mutations create new body parts so animals can evolve into other kinds of animals. So now I'm going to move on to another topic that Darwinists claim as evidence for their theory of evolution: fossils. They teach that all the fossils that have been dug up over the last couple of centuries came from millions of years of extremely gradual sediment, which all form something they call the geologic column. But there's a lot of problems with their theory that they don't tell you about in the textbooks. First, let me explain how a fossil is created to begin with, and then you'll see that their theory has a huge problem. The only way a fossil can exist is if the living animal gets buried very quickly. It can't have time to either rot away in the open air or to get eaten by other animals. The animal has to get completely buried immediately, or else it won't become a fossil. So how does that ever happen? It happens in a flood. And I'm pretty sure the Bible mentions a flood that happened a long time ago. It's very logical to believe that all the billions of fossils that they've found are a result of Noah's flood, not millions of years of sediment. Their theory claims that animals died and then it took millions of years for them to get buried and become a fossil. But that's impossible. So even if they claim that all the fossils were quickly buried in some kind of flood, that only proves that their evidence supports what the Bible teaches anyway. Did you know that fossils are generally found in the swimming position? Now that might not mean much about fossils of fish, right? But what about the land animals that are found in a position as if they're trying to swim? Why would that be? Because they were trying to escape Noah's flood. Did you know that many times fossils are found in huge clumps of bones all jumbled together like a box of jigsaw puzzle pieces? The animals were all ripped apart and mixed around as if they were in a washing machine. Just a big jumbled up mess of animal bones. But they weren't rotted away. They were all still buried quickly into a huge fossil graveyard. How does that happen? Sure sounds like something that would happen during Noah's flood to me. Now I'm going to do something that I usually don't do in my sermon videos. I'm going to show you pictures. Here is a picture of a fossil graveyard. It's just a whole mishmash of various fossils that are all jumbled together like they were in a washing machine. Okay, and how about polystrate fossils? What's that, are you probably thinking? A polystrate fossil is a fossil of a tree that was buried deep underground, and it somehow goes from one rock layer into another rock layer. These rock layers are supposedly millions of years old, and a different rock layer would be millions of years older than the one above it. But the tree is going between both rock layers. First of all, how does a tree end up buried like that to begin with? But more importantly, how does it end up spanning between two separate rock layers that are supposedly millions of years apart from each other? There's no logical answer if you believe in Darwinism's claim that the rock layers are millions of years apart from each other. The only logical conclusion would be that the layers aren't millions of years apart from each other, and that the tree somehow got buried in all of the rock layers before they solidified all at the same time. Noah's flood is the only logical explanation. Polystrate fossils are one of the best pieces of evidence that we Christians have for Noah's flood. Sometimes these trees are even found buried upside down. They didn't grow there, people. They were knocked down during the flood and quickly buried within multiple layers of stratification. I want to show you a picture of this too. All right, there you have a tree that is spanning between multiple rock layers. At the bottom, it's coal, and then it goes through another rock layer, and then at the top, it goes into another coal seam. That's what the circles are there for. This can't be explained by regular millions of years geology. How does a tree get between multiple coal layers like that? So let's talk about those layers. They call it the geologic column. But did you know that concept of the geologic column was actually created by a guy in the early 1800s without actually seeing any column? No one's ever seen an actual column of stratification that matches the supposed geologic column. It only exists in the textbook diagrams, kind of like those ascent of man diagrams and evolutionary family tree diagrams. Their concept of an evolutionary geologic column is completely based on historic science, not empirical science. It's based on guesswork, not actual observation. Now, there's no question that there are various layers of stratification in the Earth, but where'd they come from? Darwinists will insist that it must have taken millions, if not billions of years for them to get there, but that's just not true. They certainly can't prove it empirically. They only believe it because it's actually their religion. Those layers all came from Noah's flood. They all formed at the same time during the year-long flood. The flood wasn't just 40 days and 40 nights. That was just the rain at the beginning. Noah was in the ark for more than a year. But getting back to fossils, it's important to understand how Darwinists date the fossils that they find in those rock layers. Believe it or not, it's not by carbon dating. I'll be getting into radiometric dating methods like carbon dating soon, probably next week. But that's not how they determine how old they think fossils are. Instead, what they do is they dig up a fossil and then determine what kind of animal it was. Then they look at their chart of what are called index fossils. Then they determine how old the fossil is based on what the chart says. If the animal is a dinosaur bone, then they say the bone must be at least 65 million years old because that's when the dinosaurs supposedly died. Do you see the assumptions built into their method? But wait, it gets worse. How do they determine how old a rock layer is? That dinosaur bone that they just dug up that I just mentioned, what they do is they now decide that the rock layer that the bone was found in must have been the Jurassic rock layer because they found a dinosaur bone in it. But how do they determine how old a rock layer is otherwise? Again, it's not by radiometric dating. It's by looking at what kind of fossils are in the rock layer. Do you get that? Do you understand what that means? They determine how old a fossil is by looking at which rock layer it was found in. But they determine how old a rock layer is by looking at which fossils are found in it. That would be called circular reasoning. They date the rocks by the fossils and the fossils by the rocks. And the whole thing is based on an imaginary chart created by Charles Lyell back in 1830. There's no empirical science here. It's all based on false assumptions. Did you know that the geologic column has multiple different layers of limestone? How do you know which layer of limestone it is? By the fossils it has in it, they say. But how do you know how old those fossils are? By which rock layer those fossils are found in according to the geologic column chart. 100% circular reasoning. So what kind of proof of Darwinism do fossils provide then? Darwinists point to fossils all the time as major evidence that we all evolved from ape-like beings millions of years ago. But where's their actual evidence? First of all, they haven't proven that the fossils or the rock layers are millions of years old, but we'll get into the age of things more deeply later on. But where's the evidence that those fossils prove that animals turned into other animals? In Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, he speculated that if his theory was correct, that there would be a whole bunch of transitional fossils found in the ground. We should find a whole bunch of fossils of animals that were somehow in between the animals that we have today. Something half dinosaur and half bird. Something half cow and half whale. Something half ape and half human. I've already explained in an earlier sermon that every single one of the supposed cavemen fossils were either frauds or just regular men. There has never been a transitional fossil found between humans and any other primate. They've had over 150 years now. It's not from a lack of looking, but it's the same story for all the animals. There's never been a single transitional fossil found to suggest that any animal turned into another animal. Every single fossil that's ever been dug up has always been a fully formed animal like the ones we have today. The only thing that the supposed fossil record proves is that the entire globe was once destroyed in Noah's flood, just like the Bible says it was. Next, I'll start getting into other things like carbon dating, petrification, and the Grand Canyon. Now go read Genesis 6 through 9 about Noah's flood.